Choosing the right scope and escape from Tarkov can sometimes mean the difference between life and death. If you're not aware, in 12.11, a lot of the scopes in Tarkov changed quite significantly. Some of the scopes that used to be good are now not so good, and some of the ones that are not so good are actually really good. So today we're going to be diving into the differences. I'm going to be showing you guys the before and after with some thoughts on my favorite scopes in this current patch. So first up, let's start talking about FOV. Now, FOV is one of the most misunderstood things in Escape from Tarkov. The main difference that FOV can make is, first and foremost, it is your peripheral view. This is actually quite important because the lower your FOV, the closer the scope will seem towards you. So if you are one of those people that do prefer the scope nice and close to your screen, then having a lower FOV is the way to go. Now, if we go from 50 all the way up to 75, the first difference that you're going to see is the fact that everything seems to fishbowl a lot. Things that seem further away aren't actually the higher the FOV. Your judgment of distance can become different, but the main difference is that your scope is going to seem further away from you. You're going to see more of the dust cover, and you're also going to see more of your peripherals. But everything in the center of your screen will be slightly more grouped, and sometimes this is actually a bad thing. So for the sake of testing today, or as I would always recommend anyway, is to keep your FOV between 65 and 68. I do believe that you can go towards 70, but I wouldn't try 75 as there are some problems with zeroing. For the sake of this video, I did all of the filming here today on 63 FOV, as that was the perfect medium between 50 and 75. So without wasting your time, let's jump straight into the scopes before and after so you guys can see some of those differences. So now you've seen the scopes side by side, but you still may be confused on which one's right for you. Unfortunately, it's still personal preference, but I'm going to give you guys some of my personal opinions on some of the scopes right now and some ones that I really can't go without. Let's start off by talking one of the first categories, and that is Eotech, or holo sights in general. Now, holographics right now in Tarkov feel really good. especially ones like the XPS-0, the XPS-2, and also the XPS-3. These scopes actually at the moment have become even crisper than before, and depending on the gun setup are actually even further forward on the rail, which makes them a better alternative. Unfortunately, some like the Eotech 553 have a very nice reticle, but take up a lot of your peripheral vision as it sits further back on the rail or the dust cover for no apparent reason. Now, one scope that I wouldn't even recommend to my worst enemy, the Eotech HHS-1, is now actually incredibly good. Now, I know a lot of you haven't even used this scope before because of how many people would completely shit on it, but right now I got to guarantee to you guys it is actually a lot better. First of all, the 1x magnification is now, well, actually 1x. It doesn't have a zoom effect at all, which is really good for CQC. On top of that, now that it's no longer magnified, it means that the optic where you slap it across and then magnify through that, the 3x option, is no longer wobbly and blurry. It is actually much cleaner and is actually now, well, a 3x, which is great. The scope is working perfectly and it's working like it's meant to, which means it is a great option right now. It is currently around 30,000 rubles on the flea market, and I personally believe it's one of the most slept on scopes in the community. For having a 1 and a 3x is just awesome. Now, if you want to go holographic, but you don't want to pay for the Eotech brand name, there are a few different options. One of the new Valday crochet scopes is actually incredibly cheap at the moment from Prapor, and on top of that is an incredibly clean reticle. Unfortunately, it has some serious height over bore issues, as it's currently one of the highest sitting scopes in the game. So if you are going to use this scope, consider putting it on the front of the gun, or don't put it on a gun that's already taking up most of your screen, as sometimes your bullet won't hit where it's meant to. This scope, however, is incredibly good as a budget option to the Eotech sights. Another great holographic sight is the Vortex Razor UH1, which also recently had a crispier sight added to it and less blurriness around the edges of the actual reticle. Not only is this already a really nice scope, now if you compare the Vortex Razor to the Romeo 08T, which is one of the new holographics from Sig, you can actually see that the UH1 has a cleaner housing and also a less cluttered reticle. Now, I'm not saying that the Sig holographic is bad, but I don't really like how much is going on in the scope at the moment. And the weird part is the Sig one is also more expensive on the flea market than the UH1 at the moment, which makes zero sense to me because the UH1 is actually an incredibly good option right now. All right, so enough about holographics. Let's get into some of those compact colliminators and some of those nicer scopes that are nice and tight. Let's start off with some of the ones that need mounts that are a little bit more expensive, but I would go ahead and recommend, and then we'll get into the budget at the end. Let's start off with one of my personal favorites right now, and that is the Leupold DeltaPoint. The Leupold DeltaPoint is hands down one of the cleanest scopes in the game right now, period. The triangle reticle itself also became crispier in 12.11, making it a great option, especially since it sits so low on the gun. Another option similar to the Leupold DeltaPoint, the Trijicon RMR. Now, I gotta tell you guys, I've always been a fan of the Trijicon RMR. In fact, I'm a little bit of a fanboy of Trijicon scopes in general, especially the ACOG. Papa bless the ACOG. But the RMR now not only is a crispier dot than before, which was quite blurry in previous patches, but is now slightly more orangey tinted than red, which I guess is a bit of a problem outdoors. But indoors, this scope is clean. It's a tight package. Unfortunately, the biggest problem with the scope is it can be quite wobbly at times. But for the price and how low profile it is, the Trijicon RMR is absolutely phenomenal. Now let's get into two scopes which I think are probably one of the biggest glow ups in this patch. And I mean, they were absolutely dog shit in the patch before, and now they're actually really nice. Let's talk about the first one, and that is the Aimpoint T-1. Now this is a scope that you get from Peacekeeper himself, and it goes on a mount. The best thing about the Aimpoint is you can either put it on a riser or have it nice and flush with your gun. It is a pretty damn clean field of view and doesn't have much going on. It also has one of the cleanest dots, hands down one of the crispiest sight pictures I've seen in the game, period. This scope is absolutely amazing right now, and I definitely recommend it. The only problem is, because it sits so low, if you don't use it with a riser, some muzzle flash may be an issue. Another great Aimpoint scope is the Aimpoint M4 Comp. Now, the M4 Comp is once upon a time another TerraBad scope that's been fixed this patch. The dot, once again, is way less blurrier than it was before, and it also comes in at a really low price point. Not only does it look cool, but it takes up a little bit more of your peripheral vision than the T1, which may be an issue. Last but not least, let's talk about budget. Some of the best budget scopes at the moment when it comes to red dots. The first one here that I would have to recommend would obviously be the PK-06. Now, I know a lot of people are hating on the PK-06 after the changes and ripped the original PK-06, which I think was like, the best fucking scope in the game, let's be real. But the problem is with the PK-06 right now is it's quite blurry. But if you do put it in the single dot mode, it is actually still pretty damn clean. On top of that, it's around 10,000 rubles from Jaeger himself. So if you can buy a couple per reset from traders now for 10k, it makes it a really good budget option at the moment in comparison to a lot of other scopes. Another really good budget scope is still the Cobra sights, guys. Now, I know a lot of the different toggles on the Cobra EKPs are pretty damn shit at the moment. Unfortunately, I would actually recommend not using any of them except for the single chevron, as I believe it is the cleanest and the most accurate. And the last really good scope to run if you're on a budget is gonna have to be the Walther MRS. Now, I know this scope isn't super good and has a lot of different modes which are kind of TerraBad, but one scope option, which is the single dot, is still pretty damn clean. If you compare it to the P1X Weaver, which is also a decently around the same price scope, you can actually notice that both of the two have been nerfed quite heavily this patch and are significantly worse. But because they're worse, they are much cheaper on the flea market and also from traders. Now, these two scopes are actually basically around about the same price and also around about the same blurriness and wobbliness. These two are still two good budget options. So what do you guys think is currently the best red dot in Escape from Tarkov? There is a lot of contention and personal preference probably around the community about which ones are good now and which ones are bad. Ultimately, I would recommend trying out all of these different scopes on your own. If a scope looks horrible at the back of your gun, consider maybe running it on the handguard if it does have a rail on top. Sometimes that does help with the sight picture. Also, I would consider playing around with your FOV settings and find something that works for you. I run 68 FOV and I find this to be the sweet spot with scopes. I am going to be working on a video very similar to this one, giving some thoughts and some comparisons about the assault scopes. We're going to be talking about that soon in another video. Thank you so much for watching to the very end. I really appreciate all the support on the YouTube, guys. Consider subscribing. I appreciate you watching to the very end. And as always, we'll see you on the next one.